Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if Napoleon had conquered Russia? Picture this, you're standing in Red Square as September snow begins to fall, watching the tricolors of France flutter above the Kremlin's ancient walls. The Grande Armée didn't retreat, they stayed, they adapted, and they conquered. You probably won't survive what comes next in this alternate timeline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You trudge through Moscow's smoldering streets in your worn cavalry boots, watching Napoleon's engineers work frantically to winterize the city. Unlike our timeline, the emperor made a crucial decision. Instead of chasing Alexander's retreating army, he ordered his troops to dig in and transform Moscow into a fortress. The Russian winter that historically destroyed his forces becomes his greatest ally as you help construct heated barracks from the city's abandoned palaces. You watch in disbelief as Tsar Alexander I's carriage disappears into the northern horizon, abandoning his ancient capital to the French emperor. The Russian nobility, caught between loyalty and survival, begin trickling back to Moscow with white flags and nervous smiles. Alexander's retreat to St. Petersburg creates a power vacuum that Napoleon exploits masterfully. You witness him appointing Russian boyars as regional governors, promising them expanded territories in exchange for cooperation. The Orthodox Church, initially resistant, bends the knee when Napoleon guarantees religious freedom and rebuilds their burned cathedrals. By November, you're helping establish Napoleon's winter court in the Kremlin's restored halls, where Russian aristocrats in their finest furs bow before the French emperor. The psychological impact reverberates across Europe. If mighty Russia can fall, no nation stands immune to Napoleon's ambition. You observe couriers racing westward with news that will reshape the continent, while Alexander's increasingly desperate letters to his remaining generals go unanswered as they defect to the victor. You stand in Vienna's Hofburg Palace watching Emperor Francis I sign his unconditional surrender, his hands trembling as he dissolves the Holy Roman Empire forever. Austria's defeat comes swiftly, with Russian resources now flowing to Napoleon's war machine. The Habsburg army crumbles within weeks. You observe Metternich desperately negotiating terms while Napoleon dictates from his mobile throne, demanding Austria's complete integration into his continental system. The ancient empire that survived 1,000 years dies with a whimper, not a bang. In Berlin, you witness King Frederick William III even more humiliating capitulation as Prussian generals kneel before Napoleon's marshals. The combined Franco-Russian steamroller proves unstoppable. You watch Russian Cossacks and French dragoons patrol the Brandenburg Gate together, their former enmity forgotten in shared victory. Britain finds itself completely isolated, its traditional European allies either conquered or converted. You see merchant ships turned away from every continental port as Napoleon's economic blockade finally achieves its devastating potential, strangling British trade and forcing London into desperate isolation. You sail across the Atlantic aboard a French frigate, carrying Napoleon's secret correspondence to President Jefferson about an expanded Louisiana Purchase. With Russian grain and timber now financing his empire, Napoleon no longer needs American gold. Instead, you witness him practically giving away vast territories to prevent British influence in the New World. The transaction doubles America's size overnight, while you observe Jefferson's amazement at acquiring not just Louisiana, but Florida and parts of the Caribbean for a fraction of the original price. Back in London, you watch Prime Minister Perceval pace his office frantically as reports arrive of Britain's crumbling financial position. The Royal Navy, once invincible, now faces a combined Franco-Russian fleet that outnumbers British ships 2-1. You see panic in the London Stock Exchange as investors realize their island fortress strategy has failed spectacularly. With continental markets closed and American trade redirected to France, you witness Britain's industrial revolution grinding to a halt as raw materials become impossible to obtain, forcing factories to close and unemployment to skyrocket. You march through the streets of Warsaw as Polish revolutionaries tear down Russian eagles and hoist the tricolor, inspired by Napoleon's promise of national liberation. The emperor's victory doesn't just conquer territories, it ignites the revolutionary spirit across Europe's oppressed peoples. You witness Hungarian patriots in Budapest declaring independence from Austrian rule, while Italian carbonari in Naples dream of unification under French protection. The old order crumbles as Napoleon's democratic ideals spread like wildfire, transforming his military conquest into an ideological revolution. In the German states, you observe student societies forming secret meetings, planning republican governments modeled on France's constitutional monarchy. The very nobles who once opposed Napoleon now find themselves swept aside by their own people's demand for liberty, equality, and fraternity. You watch as ancient guilds dissolve, feudal obligations vanish, and peasants claim ownership of lands their families worked for centuries. Napoleon's Code Napoleon becomes the template for legal systems across the continent, while you see ordinary citizens participating in government for the first time in their lives. You stand in Napoleon's new administrative capital of Strasbourg, watching as the emperor unveils his masterpiece, a Europe divided not by ancient kingdoms but by efficient administrative regions. The old map with its crazy quilt of duchies, principalities, and free cities disappears as you observe surveyors redrawing borders based on language, culture, and economic logic. The Holy Roman Empire's 300-plus microstates become 30 rational departments, each governed by merit-based bureaucrats rather than hereditary nobles who inherited their positions through medieval bloodlines. In these new territories, you witness the systematic dismantling of feudalism as Napoleon's administrators arrive with wagons full of legal documents. Peasants who once owed their lords 3 days of labor per week suddenly find themselves free citizens with property rights. You observe the destruction of toll booths, guild restrictions, and internal customs barriers that once strangled trade. A German merchant can now transport goods from Hamburg to Rome without paying dozens of separate taxes, while you see standardized weights, measures, and currency creating Europe's first truly unified market. You walk through the transformed factories of Lyon, where Russian iron and French ingenuity create the world's most advanced industrial complex. Napoleon's victory unlocks Siberia's vast mineral wealth. You watch trainloads of ore rolling westward while French engineers establish blast furnaces that dwarf anything in Birmingham. The emperor channels his military genius into economic warfare, turning France into an industrial juggernaut that makes Britain's head start irrelevant. You observe steam engines powering textile mills that produce cloth faster and cheaper than their struggling English competitors. In the laboratories of Paris, you witness scientists combining French innovation with Russian resources to push technological boundaries. Napoleon's Grande École graduates work alongside captured Russian engineers, developing new metallurgy techniques and precision manufacturing that revolutionize everything from weapons to agriculture. You see the birth of mass production lines years before they appear in our timeline, as French factories supplied with unlimited raw materials perfect assembly methods. The continental system transforms from defensive trade policy into aggressive economic conquest, with you watching French goods flood global markets while British products become luxury items. You stand on the deck of the flagship Ocean as Admiral Villeneuve leads the combined Franco-Russian fleet toward the English Channel, their 200 ships darkening the horizon like a maritime avalanche. The Russian Baltic Fleet, instead of being destroyed, now serves under French command with you watching Cossack Marines practice boarding techniques alongside French sailors. Napoleon's mastery of logistics transforms naval warfare. You observe supply ships carrying months of provisions while hospital ships ensure wounded crews receive immediate treatment, creating a sustainable fleet that can maintain blockades indefinitely. Through your spyglass, you witness the Royal Navy's desperate last stand at the Battle of Dover, where Nelson's successor Admiral Collingwood leads Britain's remaining 80 ships against impossible odds. The economic strangulation has already crippled British shipbuilding. You see their vessels using inferior materials and undermanned crews while Napoleon's fleet operates with mathematical precision. As French artillery pounds Dover's white cliffs and Russian sailors storm Portsmouth, you realize you're watching the end of Britannia's rule over the waves, with British naval supremacy dissolving into history like morning mist. You enter the grand halls of the newly established Imperial University of Europe in Berlin, where Napoleon's educational reforms create the world's first truly international institution of learning. Students from Warsaw to Madrid study under the same curriculum, all conducted in French as the continent's new lingua franca. You witness the emperor's vision of intellectual unity as young minds from former enemy nations collaborate on mathematical theorems and philosophical debates. The old system of church-controlled education crumbles as you observe secular schools teaching science, engineering, and rational thought to a generation that will never know the religious wars that once tore Europe apart. In the legal courts of Vienna, you watch judges applying the Code Napoleon with mechanical precision, creating unprecedented consistency across the continent. Property rights, marriage laws, and criminal justice follow the same principles whether you're in Moscow or Madrid. You observe the birth of a unified European identity as shared institutions replace ancient tribal loyalties. Citizens travel freely between regions, intermarry across former national boundaries, and consider themselves Europeans first, locals second. Napoleon's greatest victory isn't military, it's cultural, creating a continental civilization that will endure long after his eagles have fallen. You stand in the Tuileries Palace's Hall of Mirrors, now 50 years old, watching Napoleon III, the original emperor's nephew, celebrate the golden anniversary of the Russian conquest. The aging veterans of the Grande Armée, their uniforms heavy with medals, salute as you observe how their sacrifice created a Europe free from the devastating wars that plagued previous centuries. Yet cracks appear in this imperial paradise. You notice the whispered conversations about Republican movements in the American territories, the growing industrial unrest in London's conquered districts, and the stirring of new nationalisms that Napoleon's unity couldn't entirely suppress. As twilight falls over this alternate world, you contemplate the price of Napoleon's triumph. The millions who died in the extended campaigns, the cultures that vanished under French hegemony, the technological innovations that might have emerged from competitive nations rather than unified empire. You wonder if humanity traded its chaotic, violent, but ultimately creative diversity for the cold efficiency of imperial order. Perhaps the greatest victory contains the seeds of its own limitation, a Europe that conquered the world but lost something essentially human in the process, leaving you to ponder whether Napoleon's dream became humanity's beautiful nightmare. The story winds down like a distant church bell fading into evening mist. You've witnessed an alternate timeline where Napoleon's genius reshaped not just Europe, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. His conquest of Russia created a domino effect that toppled ancient kingdoms, birthed new nations, and forged a unified continent decades before our world achieved such unity. Yet every triumph carries its shadow. The price of order often comes at the cost of freedom, and the dream of universal peace may require the sacrifice of individual dreams. This alternate history reminds us that single moments can pivot the entire course of human events. One winter, one decision, one man's refusal to retreat changed everything. But perhaps the most profound question isn't what would have happened if Napoleon had conquered Russia, but what we lose and gain whenever we choose order over chaos, unity over diversity, empire over independence. So here's my question for you. Would you rather live in Napoleon's efficiently organized European empire with its guaranteed peace and prosperity, or in our messier, more chaotic world where individual nations still struggle to find their own paths? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on this trade-off between security and freedom.